This is topic 10 from Econ 3, and we're looking this time at government interventions to try and correct market failures. The two main market failures that we need to understand in this topic are negative externalities and positive externalities. Now, you should be fairly comfortable with these from studying AS economics, but let's just very quickly recap over the theory behind these two different types of market failures. Negative externalities are overproduced and overconsumed. Okay, so they're overvalued by society, and this equation sums up perfectly what the problem is. We know that social costs, the full impact of the production or the consumption of a good or a service, is equal to private costs plus external costs. Now, if we leave the allocation of resources in these markets to market forces, then businesses and consumers will not pay for the external costs. What this means is that the selling price and production costs are too low. Okay, now let's just draw a diagram which illustrates this problem. So we know that when people demand goods and services, they think solely about their marginal private benefits, and of what benefit they will get out of the consumption of a particular product. Businesses will think solely about the private cost of what it will cost them to produce the good or service. So what we've got, when we have market failure, the selling price will be P1 and the quantity will be Q1. A business, though, should really be considering the full social costs. So when we have no market failure, the selling price should be higher and the quantity should be lower. Now, because we're not thinking about the external costs, what's happening is that this product is being overconsumed. We should be at Q2, but we're at Q1. So this triangle here measures our degree of overconsumption, and this is our deadweight loss. So that is the market failure of negative externalities. Let's look at positive externalities then. Positive externality is the exact opposite of a negative externality. This time the product is undervalued by society, it's underproduced and underconsumed. And again, it can be demonstrated with an equation. Full social benefits are equal to private benefits plus external benefits. This product, though, is undervalued, as we said, by society, so what will not be considered in a free market economy are the external benefits. So what this often means is that the selling price is too high. People aren't prepared to pay for this product because they're not thinking about the impact on society in a positive way of their consumption. And again, let's graph it. So again, demand is based on marginal private benefits. Supply, marginal private cost. So current equilibrium point is here again. But what we know is that when people consume this product, they should be on a much different demand curve. They should be thinking about full social benefit. So in reality, people should pay P2 and consume Q2. Now we can try and make people think about all these external benefits, but in reality it's not going to happen. So what we have to try and do is to look at the original demand line and look at how we can extend demand by lowering price. So I'm just going to go down demand line and I'm going to stop at this point here. The reason why this point is useful is if we can lower price to P3, then people will actually consume the products in the correct quantities. So what normally happens is we subsidise supply. And that subsidy will make businesses produce more, that forces price down to P3, and we correct the market failure. So what we've got there, we've got the market failures that go with negative and positive externalities. What I want to think about now is what can we do to correct these market failures? Most obvious forms of intervention are indirect tax, subsidies, regulation, information provision. And when we look at environmental market failure, we can focus on the above, but we can also bring in what we call pollution regulating and pollution permits. So these are linked to negative externalities in effect. So let's just go through what we're doing here then. First of all, indirect tax. If we're looking at environmental pollution, so people driving their cars, businesses polluting, for example, the CO2 they create in a free market economy will not be paid for. That means the external costs it creates will be paid for by society. It's people that haven't created the problem. So indirect tax works on the assumption that we can shadow price the external costs. We then impose a tax equal to the external cost, which will correct the problem. Subsidies, when we're looking at positive externalities, again, we have to shadow price the external benefits. Once we've done that, we can correctly work out the size of the subsidy we need to make people consume the product in the correct quantities. Big problem with these top two is though, well, how can you get this shadow pricing right? It's extremely difficult to get right. You get it wrong, problems remain. Indirect tax. Other government failures here include political agenda. Taxes are unpopular, so will the government do it? Problem with subsidies is paying for it. Regulation. Okay, if we're looking at pollution, well, we can regulate the pollution that businesses are allowed to create. So maybe on airlines, we put limits on the pollution they can create. We've got limits on car emissions as well. Big problem you've got this time though is enforcement. Enforcing these laws is extremely difficult to do. So we can see then from these top three examples of indirect tax subsidies regulation how in theory they can reduce external costs or create more external benefits. But we've also seen these examples of government failure. So why these solutions might not work. Information provision. Give people the information so they can make a better decision. Try and make people think about the external costs and benefits a bit more. But the problem here is people failure. People know the benefits for society of consuming less cars, going more on public transport. But people are selfish beings. They think about themselves, so we have people failure. When we're trying to correct environmental problems, we can use the above. So tax on pollution, we can use subsidies to fund investment in clean technology, regulation on regulating how many emissions businesses can create, or provide information to make people aware of the problems they're creating. Other things that we can do though, pollution regulating, pollution permits. Pollution regulating, well, it's what we've already mentioned really in effect. Think about an airline. There'll be limits on the emissions they're allowed to create. On businesses, there'll be limits on how much CO2 they can create. Now, pollution permits are a bit different. These work on something called the tragedy of the commons. Seas and the air are heavily polluted because no one owns them particularly. So people pollute and they leave it to other people to worry about. Daft example, but when I was at university, I shared a house with 5 other lads. The corridors separating our rooms were seen as no one owns them. So all our rubbish used to get chucked out onto the corridors. No one worried about it. A pollution permit is designed to make people think about that rubbish on that corridor, make businesses think about the impacts on the seas and the rivers. Now, what a pollution permit would do is, it would in fact charge for pollution. So a business would be allocated a permit based on what their needs are in terms of how much pollution they're allowed to create. If they want a bigger permit, they've got to buy more from another business that's maybe not using all their permit. If they go over their permit, they can be fined. But the incentive is if they use less than their permit says, they can actually sell some of it onto another business. So what it will do is give businesses an incentive to reduce their pollution levels. Again, though, you've got scope for government failure. Well, what price do you charge people for the permits? How do you decide which business gets what permit? So very, very difficult to do. And the only way these work on a global scale, which is what this problem is if every single country in the world uses these pollution permits. The danger is if we use them in Britain and China doesn't use them, well, it makes no massive effect to the overall emissions created. All it does is means our businesses become less competitive against those businesses. So for it to work, every major economy will have to opt into the agreement, which is very difficult to do.